Welcome to the Science of Hockey, the podcast where we break down the science behind ice hockey. I'm the analyst, your host, and every week we explore the data, research, and evidence that shape how we play, train, and understand the game of hockey. From biomechanics to performance psychology, we take you beyond the rink and into the research lab, giving you insights that go beyond hearsay and into what really makes the difference on the ice. Whether you're a player, a coach, a parent, or just someone passionate about the sport, we're here to bring you scientifically backed information in a language that's friendly and easy to understand. So grab your skates and let's dive into the science of hockey. Hey there, hockey enthusiasts. Welcome back to the Science of Hockey. I'm the analyst, and today we're going to explore an intriguing phenomenon that has a big impact on young athletes' success, the relative age effect. In this episode, we'll break down how the relative age effect influences the development of young hockey players, including their self-perception and performance outcomes. We'll explore why players born earlier in the year may have an advantage and what this means for talent identification and development in hockey. Whether you're a player, coach, or parent, understanding these concepts could be key to creating a more level playing field for all athletes. So grab your sticks and let's get started.
Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're heading to the rink. We're going to be looking at Canadian hockey. But from kind of a different angle, we're going to be talking about the relative age effect, or as it's known in the biz, the RAE.
Yes, the RAE. You know, it's interesting. This isn't just something that happens in hockey. You actually see this effect in a lot of different areas. You see it in academics, music, business. It's this tendency for people born earlier in a certain period to have an advantage over others born later in that period.
So, let's say you've got a kid, he's trying out for a hockey team, and the cutoff date for the tryouts is January 1st. That means that a kid born in January could be almost a full year older than a kid who was born in December, even though they're both trying out for the same team in the same age group.
Yeah, and that extra year can make a huge difference when you're talking about kids. The older kids are probably going to be bigger, stronger, more coordinated, and especially when you're talking about a sport like hockey, that's really physically demanding. That can give them a pretty significant advantage right from the start.
So that's the basics of the RAE. But how does this actually play out in the real world? Well, for this deep dive, we've got a couple of studies from the Frontiers in Sports and Active Living Journal, and we're going to use those as the basis for our discussion today. The first study looks at youth hockey in Quebec. They wanted to see if the RAE impacts how kids feel about playing hockey and sports in general. The second study we'll be getting to later. That one takes us to the Canadian Hockey League, the CHL, to see if the RAE is still a thing even at that elite level.
And what the researchers found, well, it's really quite fascinating. Let's start with that first study in Quebec. What they found was that the RAE is definitely present there. They found more players born in the first 2 quarters of the year, January to June, than you would expect to see if births were evenly distributed throughout the year.
So basically, just as we suspected, more of those older kids are making the teams. But does this change as players get older?
Well, that's the interesting thing. The study found that the RAE was consistent across all age groups, from 12 to 17-year-olds. So it doesn't seem like those younger players are catching up as they get older.
Okay, so it sounds like this RAE thing is pretty ingrained. But is it the same whether you're playing for fun or if you're in a competitive league?
Well, the study found that the RAE was present in both recreational and competitive leagues.
Wow. So no matter how serious you are about hockey, your birth date might still be playing a role. But why is that? Is it something about how the leagues are structured? Or could it be that coaches are maybe unconsciously favoring the older kids? What do you think?
I think that's a great question. And it gets to the heart of why this whole relative age effect is so complex. It's probably a combination of factors. You know, maybe there are some inherent biases in the system, like those cutoff dates we talked about. But it's also possible that coaches are being subtly influenced by a player's size and skill early on, even if they're not doing it intentionally.
So how does this all affect young players psychologically? I mean, you would think that constantly being overlooked or underestimated just because of when you were born, that could have a real impact on a kid.
You would think so. And that's actually one of the things the researchers wanted to find out. Surprisingly, they found that overall, there wasn't a huge difference in how players felt about sports and exercise. It seems like most of the kids, no matter when they were born, they just love playing hockey.
Oh, everybody's happy then. Case closed.
Well, not so fast. There is another layer to this. The players who were born in the third quarter of the year, so between July and September, they actually reported having lower general physical self-concept scores compared to the kids who were born in the first quarter.
Okay, so this is where it starts to get really interesting. So maybe those younger players, they're not any less enthusiastic about the sport, but they are feeling less confident about their physical abilities in general.
It is a very interesting finding. It suggests that the RAE, maybe it's affecting how these kids see themselves, not just on the ice, but in general.
And get this, at the competitive level, the kids who were born in the first and second quarters of the year, they felt even more physically competent and strong compared to those players born later in the year. So it seems like this gap in perception is even wider when you look at the more competitive players.
This brings up a really interesting question. Do those perceptions match up with reality? Are the early-born players actually more skilled, more competent, or are they simply benefiting from that early advantage and the perceptions that come along with it?
And what about the players who were born in those later months? Are they getting enough support, enough encouragement to reach their full potential, even if they're not the biggest or strongest kids on the ice? That's where I think coaches and parents have a really important role to play.
Absolutely. We need to make sure that all players feel valued and supported, no matter when they were born. We want to create an environment where every athlete can thrive and develop a love for the game.
All right, so we've seen how the RAE plays out at the youth level. But what happens when these players reach the elite level? The Canadian Hockey League. Now, you might be thinking that by the time you get to the CHL, that whole birth date thing would kind of even out. But let's see what the research tells us.
So we've seen how this relative age effect plays out in youth hockey, but what happens when these players reach the elite level? Let's turn our attention to the Canadian Hockey League, or CHL for short.
Now, the CHL is made up of 3 major junior leagues. The Western Hockey League, that's the WHL, the Ontario Hockey League, the OHL, and the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, the QMJHL. And it's where a lot of future NHL stars, they hone their skills. And what's really interesting is that this study we're looking at, it found that the RAE, it's present across all 3 of these leagues.
Yeah, and it's not just Canadian players who are affected either. Even players from outside of Canada who come to play in the CHL, they also show this same relative age bias.
You'd think at this level, where scouts are looking for the best of the best, that this whole birthday bias would just disappear. But nope, the researchers found it's still there. They did find something kind of unexpected, though, when they look at the physical attributes of the players.
Yeah, what they found was there were no significant differences in height or weight between players born in different quarters of the year. It seems that by the time these players reach the CHL, those late bloomers, they've caught up physically.
So if size isn't the deciding factor here, where does the RAE show up in the CHL? Does it affect how these players actually perform on the ice?
Well, the study did find that players born in the first and second quarter of the year, they tended to play in more games and score more points on the power play.
So they're getting more opportunities then, more ice time, which could explain why they're scoring more goals on the power play. But here's what I thought was really interesting. When you look at the total points scored, and even strength points specifically, those differences between the birth quarters, they mostly disappear.
Right, that's a really key point. It means that when you factor out the power play, those late-born players are just as competitive, just as skilled as their early-born counterparts.
So it sounds like there's more to success in hockey than simply being bigger and stronger at a younger age.
Exactly. And it actually ties into a really fascinating theory that some experts are starting to explore, the idea of an RAE reversal.
An RAE reversal, what's that all about?
Well, the theory suggests that later in a player's development, those who are born later in the year, they might actually have an advantage.
Interesting.
Think about it. These players have had to work harder. They've had to overcome more obstacles just to get to the same level as their early-born peers.
So it's almost like they've developed this extra grit and determination because they've always had to prove themselves.
Precisely. And some researchers believe that this resilience, this perseverance, it might actually give them greater success over the long term.
So we could be seeing the beginnings of this RAE reversal playing out in the CHL, these late-born players. They're already showing they can compete with the best, even though they might have been overlooked or underestimated earlier in their careers. It really makes you wonder, if this trend continues, what does it mean for the NHL?
That is a great question. And it leads us perfectly into our final study, which takes this whole RAE investigation to the highest level of professional hockey.
All right, let's drop the puck on this NHL analysis. We've got a really fascinating article here from the journal PLOS 1. It's called the relative age effect reversal among the National Hockey League elite. And it's going to challenge some long-held assumptions about talent and success. So we've seen some hints of this RAE reversal in the CHL, but does it hold true at the NHL level? That's where this PLOS-1 study, it gets really fascinating. They analyzed data from over 5,000 NHL players, all drafted between 1980 and 2007. And they looked at all sorts of things: games played, points scored, even career longevity, the whole 9 yards.
And what they found was that for a lot of these performance categories, the late-born players didn't just catch up to the early-born players, they actually surpassed them.
I was really struck by that finding, that late-born players, especially those who were drafted in later rounds, they tended to have longer, more productive careers than early-born players who were drafted in those same rounds.
You know the NHL draft. It's all about potential. These teams are scouting these young players, trying to predict who's going to become a star, and what this research suggests is that maybe, just maybe, those scouts are overlooking some hidden gems just because those players happen to have been born a few months later.
Yeah, it's almost like those early-born players. They get so much attention early on. They're the stars of their youth leagues. But maybe that doesn't always translate to long-term success. Maybe it's the late bloomers, the ones who've had to fight for every opportunity. Maybe they're the ones who actually develop that extra drive. That helps them really excel at the highest level.
And the study found that it goes beyond just performance. Late-born players also had what the researchers called a lower career hazard.
So for our listeners out there, career hazard basically means the risk of having your career cut short. So not only are these late-born players performing better, they're also sticking around longer. What do you think all of this means for the way teams scout and evaluate talent? Are they missing out on potential superstars just because of a birth date?
It's definitely something to think about. I think this research is a good reminder that not every player develops at the same rate. There are many paths to success in hockey, and if you focus too much on early performance, you might just miss out on some amazing talent.
It makes you wonder how many incredible players never even got a real shot, just because they were born a few months too late. But now that we're starting to understand this whole RE reversal, hopefully it will change the way we think about player development and give everyone a chance to reach their full potential.
It's all about recognizing that everyone has their own individual developmental trajectory. Not everyone peaks at the same time, and not everyone follows the same path.
And you know, this isn't just about sports. This applies to so many areas of life. We all develop at our own pace. We all have our own unique strengths to offer.
That's so true. The more we understand those individual differences, the better we can create environments where everyone can flourish.
Well, this has been a really eye-opening deep dive. We've gone from youth hockey in Quebec all the way to the NHL, exploring this whole idea of the relative age effect. We've seen how this bias can affect who gets selected for teams and how young athletes see themselves. But we've also seen how those late bloomers, how they can overcome those early disadvantages and achieve some pretty incredible things.
It's been a pleasure unpacking all of this with you. I always enjoy these deep dives. They remind us that there's always more to learn, always new perspectives to consider.
We've covered a lot of ground today. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought. Remember those late bloomers, those underdogs, the ones who defied the odds. Talent. It can blossom in unexpected places and at unexpected times. So as you go about your day today, I want you to consider this. Are there any late bloomers around you? Someone who's been overlooked or underestimated? Someone with hidden potential just waiting to be discovered?
We all have a role to play in creating a world where everyone has the chance to blossom, no matter when they were born or what path they've taken.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep an eye out for those late bloomers. You never know what you might find.
Thanks for tuning in to The Science of Hockey. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share it with your friends, teammates, or anyone who loves hockey as much as you do. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment to let us know what you liked, what you'd like to hear next, or any questions you have. Your feedback helps us make the show even better. Until next time, keep your skates sharp, your mind open, and keep chasing the science behind the game.